Hmm.
So we always do the Old Testament in September, October, November. And I just find the Old Testament to be really fascinating. And I just find a lot of grace and
Yeah.
a lot of really layered stories, and really vivid people, and
Hmm.
and language that's just so interesting, the language. And the language has refrains and it has poetry and all kinds of stuff. So
Right.
I never grow tired of reading the Old Testament. I got a new translation of the Hebrew Bible. It's Robert Alter. He translated the entire Hebrew Bible, and he has a commentary. So he's a brilliant guy.
Hmm.
So he translated it into the most, you know, the closest to the original language that he could. And all the commentaries tell you about why he chose the words that he did, and how complicated some of the words are in terms of trying to nail them down, how ambiguous a lot of the words are, and how he's trying to figure it out. And one of the
Right.
things that he does, though, is when you try to keep to the original language, is you realize how often the same word reappears,
Right.
and then
Right.
you realize, oh, this is connecting to other things. Jacob's story is connecting to Joseph's story, and Joseph's story is those,
Right.
those words keep reappearing. So um, when we were just reading last week, when Jacob returns and he's wondering how Esau is going to receive him,
Hmm.
and he comes and he's like, he wants to give Esau everything he has. He says, take this blessing.
Right.
And the NRSV says, accept my gift. But when you look at the Hebrew and it says, take my blessing, you realize that he took his brother's blessing from his
Right.
father. And now
Right.
returning, he's saying, take this blessing. So when that's translated as accept this gift, you've completely lost the connection that's there.
Right. 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 You lost that.
Yeah.
Right. It's true. I never stayed in. I didn't take Hebrew at all. I took Greek for a little while.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but what I find when you do the literary criticism,
Hmm.
right, is that just like you say, words are repeated,
Hmm.
words are used because for that context, they
Hmm.
need the word to mean what
Yeah.
it means in
Yeah.
that context,
Yeah.
right? And so, but even when we read it in the English, even with that story, right?
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
before he decides to give the gift, right?
Hmm.
He's scared as hell, right? He's like, oh, he's gonna kill me.
Hmm.
Um, and even wrestles with God, right? Because
Hmm.
he doesn't want to be killed.
Hmm.
And so at the end of the day, he knows that the only thing he can do is give back what he stole,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Which is the blessing, right?
Hmm.
So, don't kill me, just come and take what is really yours,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that gets lost in translation, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
people are looking at it as, oh, he is his brother and he wants to.
Hmm.
No, he
Hmm.
is scared
Hmm.
for his life,
Yeah.
and he knows that the only way to make it right
Hmm.
is to give back what he stole,
Hmm.
right? But then it goes back to what you say about grace,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that Esau gives his brother grace,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Incredible
Gives his
grace.
brother grace,
Yeah.
incredible grace, right?
Yeah.
Because he really could have killed him,
Hmm. Hmm.
and in those days he would have been justified, right?
Yeah.
For me, reading it, the family dynamics of it all, you know, um, I always felt that way even before I became a social worker. But then after I,
Mm.
studied social work, and I was like, these folks is a mess. But 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 the grace, as you
Mm.
say,
Mm.
um, the underlying message is that God will never leave you or forsake you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That even when at his angriest,
Hmm.
he's willing to change his mind, right?
Hmm.
Um, I studied African studies in college, and so we know that every African tribe, every African nation has its own um
Origin
creation
story.
story.
Yeah.
Its own, all right. And so you recognize that Genesis is that
Hmm.
for the Hebrew people, right? This is
Hmm.
their origin story. You see genealogy in there. So it's the telling of a people,
Hmm.
and of course we know not just one person wrote it,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
That it's a compilation of stories, and even with the creation story, the Genesis
Hmm.
1, right? We see in Genesis 1 and 2 that there are two creation stories,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so
And that they're not original to the Hebrews.
and that they're not original to the Hebrews, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Hmm.
and so and that the two stories always fascinate me
Hmm.
because the first story is inclusive. We will make man or humanity in
Hmm.
our image,
Yeah.
right? And so who is the hour? That was
Hmm.
always my question, right?
Hmm.
Who is the hour,
Yeah. Who are they
right?
talking to?
Who are they talking about, right? Who is the
Who are
hour,
they talking to? I'm talking to you.
right?
Who are you talking
Right. And it was only not until I started studying uh non-canonical texts,
to?
right? In early Christian texts,
Hmm.
where this hour has gets its own story,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that there are heavenly realms
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and um and that in these heavenly realms it's eons and spirits
Hmm.
and different forces,
Hmm.
um which sounds real African
Hmm.
at the end of the
Hmm.
day, right?
Hmm.
Which sounds real African, which sounds real
Hmm.
uh Eastern,
Hmm.
um
Hmm.
but they didn't come from anywhere. And of course, those texts are so seen as non-orthodox,
Yeah,
heresy,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
Um, but it helps make sense,
Hmm.
right? Of what you because who is our, right? Who is our
Hmm.
who and what is the hour comprised of, right? So
Hmm.
when you read these texts, there's always a male and a
Hmm.
female
Hmm.
component. There's
Hmm.
always this partnership, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so the patriarchal, right, second story, which Adam is made first, a rib is taken to make woman to
Hmm.
help him and to be
Hmm.
a help me.
Yeah.
Um, and 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 so it's just interesting to me,
Hmm.
right? The non-canonical text saved the Old Testament text for me.
Hmm.
You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Hmm.
Help me put things in perspective.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, do you have experience with kind of opening up people's eyes to that, doing Bible study for a congregation for lay people, that you tell them, there's canonical text, there's non-canonical text, there's multiple sources inside our canonical text. And for a lot of people, that just kind of blows apart their notion of scripture that,
right,
what do you mean canonical? It's the Bible, What do you mean
right,
non-canonical? That's a heresy.
right.
When you kind of
So
introduce that critical reading to people, sometimes they really resist it because they don't want to accept it. And
right,
sometimes they accept it and suddenly the Bible becomes less meaningful to them because it's not the way it was presented to them as it came down from heaven and Moses took it and Moses said, "Here you are." And
right. Well, you know what I try to tell people, um, because I come from a tradition where uh I couldn't really straight preach that from the pulpit, right?
mm, mm,
Um, and so I've got to connect it to the canonical text.
yeah,
I
yeah,
got whenever I'm talking about non-canonical text, I got to connect it to the canonical text, right?
yeah, yeah.
And so, but I always try to talk to people, especially when I'm doing Bible study or talks on scripture, that these are our sacred texts.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
They're not sacred unless we say they are,
mm,
right?
mm, mm,
And so, of course, people get into the tradition. Well, this is what we was told. But even with what you were told,
mm-hmm,
the text is not sacred unless you say it's sacred,
mm, mm, mm,
right? And even when we say it's sacred, everything isn't sacred to us in that text, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
We learned that when Howard Thurman talked about his grandmother would have him read the Bible to him,
mm-hmm,
but she didn't want him to read anything that Paul wrote, right? Because she,
mm-hmm.
Because as Black people who have been
Hmm.
oppressed and
Hmm.
have been enslaved, they
Hmm.
don't want to hear nothing in the Bible that says, slave, obey your master, or
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
that confirms that slavery is good. They don't want to hear anything about that, right?
Hmm.
They don't want to hear anything that legitimizes oppression and enslavement. But aren't we the same way, right? So
Hmm.
even in the 21st century, some texts speak to us much more than other texts,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And even though I'm not a fan of Paul,
Hmm.
right,
Hmm.
overall,
Yeah,
that Philippians epistle speaks to me,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
That whole encouragement and
Hmm.
affirming your faith and affirming and motivating you to
Hmm.
hold on and to press towards the mark, that
Yeah.
speaks to me, right?
Hmm.
And so it's sacred because we say it's sacred,
Yeah, yeah. It rings true.
right? It rings true.
Yeah.
And then I also say to them, we're not always, you can't use the Bible as a factual source,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But it is a truthful source, right?
Yes, yeah.
And so, um, one of my professors, I heard one of my classmates quote this in a documentary, and he said, and I do remember him saying that everything in the Bible, what did he say? Everything in the Bible may or may not have happened, but everything in the Bible is truth.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I hope I'm paraphrasing
Hmm.
it right.
Hmm. Hmm.
But to say that you can't prove everything in the Bible,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And some things are not factual,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But the Bible is a word of truth.
yeah, yeah.
And so let's always look for the truth
Hmm. Hmm.
when we read the Bible. Let's not
Yeah,
look for the
yeah,
facts. Let's look for the truth. You
yeah.
know,
People
um,
need
I
that. They need to know that they're supposed to dig into it and they're supposed to ask questions. When you talk about Paul, I'm reminded Michael Curry, the Episcopal Archbishop.
right,
I think it was his mother, his grandmother used to say, Paul's like any preacher. He had some good sermons and he had some bad sermons.
right, right, right. And then and he was a good preacher. I think Paul is I give Paul, he's brilliant, right? So because when you read the
Hmm.
different epistles,
Hmm.
he speaks to every audience, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And especially in that Corinthian, in his first and second Corinthians, he got to really pull his brilliance
Hmm.
together
Hmm.
because these are cosmopolitan people.
Hmm.
These are not just like the Galatians,
Yeah, yeah.
just looking for some holiness.
Hmm.
The Corinthians are sophisticated, cosmopolitan people,
Yeah.
and the way he speaks to them is so much different
Hmm.
than the Roman text and the Ephesians text, right? And
Hmm.
so you got to give him the credit on his brilliance
Yeah,
in that.
yeah.
But he's a politician
Mm.
at the same time,
Oh, yeah,
creating
yeah.
creating this community
Mm.
and laws for the community to follow,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
But at the end of the day, when I teach my students on the ordination track, Paul is not Jesus,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
so when you start preaching Jesus,
Hmm.
make sure you're not quoting Paul,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because many people want to combat a lot of things with Paul text, and I'll
Hmm.
be like, but Jesus didn't say that. That's
Yeah, yeah,
Paul,
yeah, yeah.
right? So when they want to combat me on um, womanist theology or queer theology, um, they're quick
Hmm.
to throw a Paul text at me. I said, but
Hmm.
that's not what Jesus said.
Yeah, yeah,
Tell me what Jesus said.
yeah.
I think that's why when we read the Genesis, where it all begins,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, that these are not perfect people.
Yeah. So they're dysfunctional families, right? These are the most
Dysfunctional,
dysfunctional families.
most dysfunctional,
And I
and
think
yet we God does not leave or forsake them.
yeah, yeah. The worse
And
the
I,
people are, the more that the grace abounds.
the worse the people are, the more
Hmm.
exactly.
Yeah.
I was reading Cain and Abel the other day, and I was like, I got to make the case for Cain.
Mm.
What is it that Cain really do that was bad, right?
Yes.
When you read the text,
Yeah.
all of the things we believe about Cain were interjected into the text.
Mm-hmm.
But the text doesn't say Cain did anything bad outside
Mm.
of killing Abel,
Yeah.
right? He was a farmer,
Mm-hmm.
and he brought his goods. But in the text, even I was looking at it from a political social justice frame of mind,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, uh, a capitalist
Mm-hmm.
reading of
Mm-hmm.
the text, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the fattest, Abel brings God the fattest
Mm-hmm.
lamb, right? The
Yeah.
fattest
Yeah.
lamb. And Cain brings garden vegetables, right? Right?
Uh-huh.
And so in this society in which we live, right,
Mm-hmm.
the garden vegetables are better for us,
Mm-hmm.
aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The garden vegetables are what we need.
But God does
But
not look upon them with favor.
God does not look upon them with
Mm-hmm.
favor.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell me that wasn't written intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, and then Cain gets mad
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and he kills Abel,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I got to make the argument for Cain.
Mm-hmm.
Cain is the farmer. He's giving us what we need,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But yet, what is being accepted? What is not good for us, right? And
Yeah.
some people might push back. Oh, what's wrong with meat?
Mm-hmm.
But the text says it's the fattest meat. And
Yeah.
what meat is not good for us?
Yeah.
The fattest meat,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Mm-hmm.
so, but God doesn't kill Cain,
Mm-hmm.
right? He
Mm-hmm.
doesn't kill him.
Mm-hmm.
And Cain makes his own case. This punishment you give it is too hard. It's too
Yeah.
hard,
Yeah.
right? And it was, if you ask me, it was,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so God was like, okay, then I'm gonna put a mark on your head so nobody
Mm-hmm.
will kill you, but everybody knows you ain't good with me. But I'll
Yeah.
put the mark
Yeah.
on your head.
Yeah.
But he still is able to get a wife from somewhere,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And Jacob and Esau's story, Esau doesn't get the blessing because Jacob steals it, but Esau makes out fine.
But
Esau,
Esau makes
uh,
out fine.
yeah, he gets a blessing, which is seen as not being quite the same blessing or not as good a blessing, but he seems to make out fine, which
Right.
is part of the reason why he's able to be so gracious towards his brother when he comes back, is because he doesn't really have any real complaints about how his life has turned out.
Right. And because the writer is pro Jacob, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
But we do see that he's got 12 children.
mm-hmm,
So that 12, that holy 12 number,
mm-hmm,
we see that before Jacob, right? We
mm-hmm,
see that with Esau has got 12 children,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
Um and he's doing, like you say, he's doing well.
Yeah, yeah.
And what we I feel when we read the Old Testament, we fail to recognize that God is the creator of all of these people,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
that all of these people
mm-hmm.
come from Abraham's line, really,
Yeah,
and really
yeah.
come down from Adam and Eve, right?
Mm-hmm,
All these people. And so we look at the Samaritans and we look at the northern Israel people, and the text kind of writes bad about them,
mm-hmm.
but they are attached to God too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? They are, we see that in the New Testament when when Jesus is talking to the Samaritan woman, right? And she tells him, we believe
Yeah.
and we know the truth
Mm-hmm,
and we know the Messiah. And people forget that the
mm-hmm.
Samaritan people are people who are part of Israel,
Yeah, people of faith.
right? People of faith.
Mm.
And so all these people are a part of the lineage.
And then what's going on with Jacob and Esau is just the younger brother, older brother thing again. So I was looking at the blessing that Isaac wants to give to Esau, and we get that blessing there, and it says that your brother will bow to you. So Esau wanted to create a hierarchy where the older son was going to be in charge.
Mm-hmm.
Jacob would have spent his whole life, groveling at
Right,
his
right.
feet. And then when Jacob gets the blessing,
Mm-hmm.
Esau doesn't bow to him.
No,
And when Jacob comes back after all those years, he bows to Esau 7 times.
7 times.
So it's as if, there's a reversal going on, which is trying to prevent, this system of domination where the older brother is going to be oppressive.
Right,
And Jacob becomes, the one who's blessed. He becomes the patriarch, but he has to humble himself. So he escaped an oppressive system, but he still had to refer to his brother as Lord and bow
right.
to him. So there's a way in
But
which the oppression was not as bad as maybe it probably would have been if Esau got the blessing and then Jacob had to bow to him and was stuck there living in a household that was ruled by his brother.
right,
Um, so that the younger brother, older brother dynamic and the flipping of that, the reverse of that seems to be what the point is.
right, right. And so what one of my professors used to say, what's the tension in the text, right?
Mm, mm,
What's the tension in the text? So remember, Israel is a young nation,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
right? You got Mesopotamia, you got Egypt, you
mm,
got all these nations, great nations
mm-hmm,
before Israel. And so Israel has to make the case, right, on why they should be rulers, right?
mm-hmm,
Why they are great,
mm-hmm,
why they should dominate, right? And so because honestly, when you read the text, you don't see Esau as this domineering power. He
mm-hmm,
wanted to go out, be a herdsman.
mm-hmm,
He liked to eat. You
mm-hmm,
never you
mm-hmm.
never saw him as this dominate. But
Ambitious. He wasn't ambitious.
no, you didn't see that. So even if he did get the blessing,
Mm, mm,
would he have
mm,
made Jacob grovel? I don't think
mm,
so.
mm, mm.
I don't think so. We
Yeah,
see that in the exchanging for the bowl of soup, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. He
But
gives it up. Take my
did he
blessing.
take it?
I'm
Because
hungry.
so, but did he even take that serious?
Hmm.
That would be my question.
Yeah.
This whole I'm the blessed one, and did
Hmm.
he take that serious?
Hmm.
You know, they try to make him out to be this dumb person because he
Hmm.
exchanged his blessing. But did he take it serious? I
Hmm.
don't think
Hmm.
so.
Hmm.
I don't think so. And so would he have been this domineering older brother? Would he have been that? And I
Hmm.
don't think so. I don't think so.
So we're looking at, what's the truth in this story? Trying to understand the difference between truthful and factual. So there are these statements, and if we look at the ones in Genesis, such as where God says to Eve, "If you eat of this fruit of this tree, in that day you will die." So then we find out later on that it wasn't true. That's not the actual result from eating that.
Right.
Some people want to interpret it, well, they became mortal, but well, they didn't die that day. So on some level, it's not factually true. When God renames Jacob Israel, he says, now your name is Israel, but that name is never really stuck. It's always Jacob and Israel, or
Right.
just Jacob, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel.
Right.
So that when you read something about this is the way things are going to be, or this is what God decides, or this is how you can expect the consequences, that is not always true, even in the words themselves, and even in the story itself. So that as you continue to read, you're like, well, it didn't really mean that, so it must mean something else, or there's a tension between what the meaning is and what we learn later on in the story.
So, Don Miguel Ruiz, he has a book about the tree of knowledge, right? And his interpretation is that the serpent kind of gets the bad rap,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
Um, because what the serpent introduces you to is a knowledge of self,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And that religion doesn't really want you to have a knowledge of self,
Mm,
right? They
mm,
want you to be domesticated, right?
mm, mm,
And so is it bad to have a true knowledge of self,
mm, mm,
right? Because once you have a knowledge of self, then it's very hard to domesticate, right? You look at
mhm,
animals
mhm,
who what they say like a horse can't be broken, right?
mhm.
You can't break this horse because it's got its own mind, right?
Mm, mm,
And so
mm.
this whole knowledge of self is important
Yeah.
because then you get caught up in systems that don't serve you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That oppress you,
Mm-hmm.
um, and even the religious systems that make you feel less of yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Look at what religion has done to the queer community,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it is important
Mm-hmm.
to seek the tree of knowledge. It's
Yeah.
important to seek
Yeah.
that tree,
Yeah.
right? Um,
So people want to impose a binary of good and evil, that if God is good, then the serpent must be evil. And but as you're reading the story, like Jacob wrestling, who is Jacob wrestling with? It's
well, and God is the creator of all things,
yeah, yeah.
and this is what we don't talk about in the church,
Mm,
that God created the light and the dark,
yeah.
the good and the bad,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
right? The good and the evil.
Yeah. So the
It's,
binary of good and evil doesn't fit very well, very neatly with the story of Genesis, but that's the way it's been taught for centuries.
but that's the way it's been taught,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so look at Abraham and Sarah. We got two instances of Abraham lying to people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not really lying, right? Because Sarah was technically his sister for real, but not fully disclosing that she was his wife.
Yeah,
And in not disclosing, they put these people in danger,
yeah,
right? Lying is evil. That's what the church told us.
yeah,
Ain't nothing good about lying,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so, but why does Abram say, why does he lie? He
Mm-hmm.
lies because of the systems of society at the time.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna go here, they're gonna see you're beautiful, and they're
Mm.
gonna want to kill me, and they're gonna want
Yeah,
to take you.
yeah.
So we gotta tell them
Mm-hmm.
that you're my sister, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which was, and some people will, semantics say, oh, well, he wasn't really lying,
Mm-hmm.
right? But in both instances, the two leaders say, why did you tell me? Why did you
Yep.
bring this on my household?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. They know he lied.
Right. And how do they know he lied? Because plagues came down on the
Mm-hmm.
Egypt ruler, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other ruler, I can't pronounce his name, Ambeliclet,
Abimelech.
Abimelech, right? So he,
That's close to it anyway.
so he, God is coming to him in dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about you sinning. And he's like, wait a minute, God, I got integrity. What are you talking about? Right? And that makes God look kind of flaky too, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because why you come to this man telling him things in dreams when you know he doesn't know the full story, right? And why you telling him he's sinning and you about to destroy him when he doesn't know the full story,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I say to people, this is our sacred text,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a sacred text written by men, written by people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Written by humans. And to err is human.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's look for the truth that comes out of the text
Yeah.
and not saying it's okay to lie about things
Yeah.
because Abraham did it, it's in the Bible. No,
Mm-hmm.
let's not do that, right? And let's not make God out to be this flaky, you know, tantrum throwing
Mm-hmm.
God if people don't do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because Christopher Morse always used to tell us in systematic theology class that humans are trying to use human terms to describe a God that is not
Mm-hmm.
human.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, woo, that's it
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
there. We're trying to use our human
Mm-hmm.
language and our human thinking to describe God, and God is not human.
Yeah. And the Bible stories are so layered and they're so complicated and they're so contrary. And people just
Right,
want to have a flat moral lesson
right. And
that
you can't, and
doesn't
you
lend
can't,
itself to that, right?
you
So
can't.
you want to read part of Genesis with me? So I'll put it up on the screen for you. Genesis chapter 1. At the beginning of time, God the Creator, God the powerful Word, and God the life-giving Spirit formed the earth and all its inhabitants. God sees that all this created work is good, and then rests on the seventh day. We're reading from the book of Genesis, chapter 1. God created women and men to preserve and protect creation. God also rested on the seventh day, the Sabbath, making it a holy day of rest. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said,
Let there be light.
and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness God called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said,
Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters.
so God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. And God called the dome sky. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said,
Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear.
and it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together God called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said,
Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it.
and it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit within the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, third day. And God said,
Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth.
and it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said,
Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky.
so God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying,
Let the waters bring,
you're right.
be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth.
And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said,
Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things, and wild animals of the earth of every kind.
and it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said,
Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth.
so God created humankind in God's own image. In the image of God, they were created, male and female, God created them. And it was so. God saw that everything that God had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus were the heavens and the earth finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that God had done, and God rested on the seventh day from all the work that God had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that God had done in creation. These are the generations of the heaven and the earth when they were created. Holy wisdom, holy word. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.
So then we go on to chapter 2. And
With a whole different story.
instead of water, instead of God's face moving on the waters, everything is dry because it hasn't rained yet.
Right.
And instead of vegetation and then animals and then people, it's people and then vegetation.
Right. Right. And you know, I was an adult when I realized it was two stories. And I was like, oh my God. You know? And so you look at the Bible very differently once you start using your thinking mind, you know. But I don't hinder people from using their thinking mind.
Hmm.
Um, because it is your sacred text, right? There
Hmm.
is things in this Bible, the book of Psalms, the book of Proverbs, um, move people. Even stories in the Genesis,
Hmm.
um, that move you, right? The story of Joseph and his brothers, right?
Hmm.
Um, and at the end of the day, um, he helps them, right? And prophecy comes true, right? So again, the grace of God, right?
Hmm.
And that God is gracious. And
Hmm.
and of course I don't like the way they try to justify all of the suffering that Joseph had to go through to get to the end point,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, because I don't, suffering is there's no justification for
Hmm.
suffering.
Hmm.
Um, but that's the way life is, right? That
Yeah, yeah.
we do suffer. Um, but who will you be at the end of the suffering, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Who will you be? Um, will you hold on to your faith? Will you
Hmm.
recognize that God doesn't leave you or forsake you?
Suffering
Um,
produces endurance, and endurance produces character.
yeah,
Character
yeah.
produces hope.
Right.
Hmm.
Character produces hope. It's a good book. It's an important book.
Hmm.
I do revert back to it often.
Hmm.
Um, and I think people should read it with an open mind,
Yeah.
with an open mind.
It's got a depth of theology that if you're willing to keep your mind open to what possibilities there are there that you weren't necessarily seeing the first time you looked at it, it can really take you to a lot of places.
Right, right.
So I want to thank you for helping me out again.
Oh, of course. Thank you for inviting me. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Take it easy and keep in touch.